Watch this.
Once again, the public testimony over taking away public money for gender transition medications and procedures was one-sided in a committee hearing. And once again, a committee chose the other side. A plan to address preferred pronouns for government employees has seen its share of delays this session. Well, today, the compelled speech bill hit another snag because of, well, a speech. This weekend, Idaho's latest high seas adventure gets one step closer to reality. But Idaho's connection to the Navy hasn't always been about open water, at least not open ocean water. It has been characterized as a money-saving proposal for Idaho taxpayers. No public money to be used for anyone trying to transition their gender. House Bill 668 has already made it through the House, and today it was up to the Senate State Affairs Committee to give it their go-ahead. But there was almost no discussion of tax dollars or how much of them will actually be saved by passing this bill. The debate was all about transgender health care, which brings us to the question and brings us Joe Paris. What are they trying to accomplish here, Joe?
Well, it depends who you ask, but the bill sponsor, Representative Julianne Young, says that she wants to save Idaho taxpayer dollars. House Bill number 668, titled "No Public Funds for Gender Transition," would accomplish exactly what the title says. The bill's language explains that the legislature believes that gender transition procedures carry substantial risk and harmful effects. Essentially, the proposal bans the use of all public funds, including Medicaid coverage, to pay for any surgery operations or medical interventions for the purpose of gender transition, regardless if it's a minor or an adult here in Idaho. And there are stands against the legislation for a few reasons. One highlighted in committee. The legislation singles out one group from care. Equal protection? Maybe not.
So what this bill is doing is it isn't blocking specific medications. It's blocking specific identities of people from accessing medication that everyone else gets access to. So the problem with this bill is really in that for me. It's not blocking something that not everyone accesses. It's blocking something that that a lot of people access in lots and lots of different ways. And I think this should be left up to doctors and the patients, right?
Lily, who you just heard from, highlighted for the committee that there are drugs prescribed by doctors that would be okay for one diagnosis, but not others under this proposed bill, essentially making the legislature weigh in on what is medically sound. Bill sponsor Julianne Young, who acknowledged that this is supposed to be a tax bill, she closed with these thoughts.
You've heard today that these treatments are medically necessary and that they are life-saving. You've also heard that they are gender-affirming. I'd like to speak to that just briefly. You can interrupt normal, healthy sexual development with puberty blockers. You can administer cross-sex hormones to create secondary sex characteristics of the opposite sex. You can remove healthy sexual organs, but you can never create the healthy sexual function of the opposite sex in an individual who is not that sex. It's scientifically impossible.
Okay, so it's pretty clear. Two very separate sides. We understand where they sit. But you may be wondering, Joe, Brian, you said this is a tax bill. How so? Well, lawmakers say that they don't want to waste taxpayer dollars on potential care that they don't agree with. So what savings would House Bill 668 actually accomplish? The answer is we don't know. The fiscal note of the legislation says that while there are specific savings are difficult to quantify, this is because of a lack of data regarding the current expenditures for these medical and surgical interventions. But they do say, Brian, that it is anticipated there will be financial savings. Again, the committee asked the representative exactly, do you have any exact numbers on this? And she said no. The legislation passed, it goes to the full Senate.
Even if it's $5, there's going to be savings to the taxpayers, but that's obviously not what they're getting at with this bill. This idea that healthy sexual function, is that the ultimate goal of somebody who's transitioning? that is debatable as well.
Right, and that depends on each individual. And I'll say for some people that are transitioning, their goal is not to try to put themselves in a new body that functions differently.
Right.
What they're trying to do is take the body they're currently in and mold it to a way that they feel comfortable in. So I understand what Representative Young is saying, but depending on who she's addressing, there are different priorities in terms of health care.
And again, I don't think we saw any testimony in favor of this bill today.
No testimony in favor. Everybody who testified was against. Again, it passed by 1 vote to the full Senate.
Thanks, Joe.
There's across the country, local officials and in the state and federal officials have not been vigilant on controlling controlled speech, vigilant in protecting us against compelled speech.
That is Republican Representative Ted Hill from Eagle presenting his compelled speech bill to open it up for debate on the House floor. This is the one that will prevent government employees from being forced to use preferred pronouns of fellow employees should they differ from their birth gender. And you may have noticed, we've been waiting for House Bill 538 to get the full House treatment for a while. It came out of the House State Affairs Committee back on February 16th, and it's been on the third reading calendar, which is State House slang for it's due for debate and a vote, since February 20th. You can see it's had its place held in line since. One time, we were told Representative Hill wasn't ready to present that day, so they didn't. They kept moving it down the calendar for weeks. So that brings us to today. Again, House Bill 538 at the bottom of the calendar, and first bill brought up right after lunch today. What you also might have noticed with that soundbite we just shared with you was how Representative Hill handled the presentation of his compelled speech bill. It wasn't exactly clear speech.
This bill will prohibit any government entity from compelling any government employee from using any compelled speech that is not as contrary to the biological sex of that individual. Was I exploring too much on that? Okay. At least 22 school districts currently have policies in place right now for gender policy, so that it's not mandatory to recognize gender policy. We need to draw the line here firmly on First Amendment rights. This is a First Amendment right issue. And stand by for questions.
Gentlemen, you can sit down. Okay. House will be at ease for just 1 second.
Okay, so the House went at ease for about 15 minutes, actually, without getting to the debate part. House Speaker Mike Moyle explained it this way when they came back.
The Speaker will take a privilege really quick and just let you know, we're just a little concerned about the gentleman from 14. And so out of abundance of caution, we're going to make sure he's okay.
Well, they made sure he was okay, but we're just not sure we've seen that in recent memory. We don't know how much, or know much, I should say, about the condition of Representative Hill, other than we were told he was okay by the time they got back to business on the floor. But then, again, they held House Bill 538 on the calendar for one more day. It is expected to be debated tomorrow. It's one of the most beautiful places in the Gem State. But Lake Pend Oreille is also one of the most important places for at least one branch of the U.S. military, the story of naval training and research in North Idaho. All right, this is the time we want you to tell us about your research. Just kidding, we can do our own research. But please do tell us what you think of the show and what we've talked about today. Text us, 208-321-5614. Don't forget your name and the hashtag #the208. Keep it clean, concise, and clever, and that gives you a pretty good shot at seeing yours at the end of the show. A big weekend coming up in the Nutmeg State for fans of the U.S. Navy, for fans of nuclear-powered submarines, for fans of christening said subs named after the Gem State. The USS Idaho, the U.S. Navy's newest Virginia-class submarine, will be formally christened Saturday at a shipyard in Connecticut. This has been a ceremony 9 years in the making. After a drought of nearly 80 years, this will be the 5th naval vessel to bear the name Idaho. And as we mentioned yesterday, those are just a handful of several connections landlocked Idaho has with the U.S. Navy. One other takes us to a naval training center, now submarine research center, in the Panhandle, and to today's 208 Redial.
The mountains, the lake, the small town charm. Modern-day Sandpoint, Idaho is a sophisticated community surrounded by nature's blessings. But its heritage dates back centuries. Like so much of the West, these lands were originally home to Native Americans.
There is documented evidence of the Kalispel Indians living in this area for at least 6,000 years. They were known to be very friendly. They welcomed the early fur traders into the area and helped them.
Ann Ferguson is curator at the Bonner County Historical Museum. She says the Kalispel Indians were also known as the canoe people because of the unusual design of their boats.
This sturgeon nose type of canoe is the type of canoe that is only known here and in the Amur River Valley of Siberia. That blunt nose sat down in the water and increased the stability of the canoe, possibly during storms and other rough water.
Perhaps the area's connection to water convinced the U.S. Navy to navigate its way to Lake Pend Oreille.
World War II delivered one of the most surprising milestones in Sandpoint's history. At the far end of Lake Pend Oreille, the Farragut Naval Training Station was built in 1941. In just 9 months, local crews helped construct nearly 800 buildings on 4,000 acres of land.
Farragut really changed Sandpoint because at that time there weren't that many jobs in Sandpoint.
During the war, 300,000 Navy recruits made their way through Farragut, briefly making it Idaho's largest city.
After the war, Farragut found itself without a purpose and was decommissioned in 1946. But that didn't mean the Navy distanced itself from North Idaho.
There's no doubt about it. This is one of the prettiest spots in Idaho, but it's not just about looks. This lake has an incredibly important function. It is so deep, so quiet, and so cold that the Navy says it makes for a perfect testing ground on submarines.
This is the only place in the U.S. that the Navy does this type of testing.
Using scaled-down models of submarines, this acoustic research detachment on Lake Pend Oreille is in charge of making military vessels as undetectable as possible.
Our whole purpose in life is to create exactly the quietest submarine possible. And so we're interested in any part of that submarine that would make noise.
On the surface, they don't look like sophisticated machines, but Commander Kevin Grundy says looks simply don't matter.
Take, for instance, this model here. You look at it and you go, with the exception of the rudder down at the end there and sort of the main shape, you'd say, well, that doesn't really look like a submarine, and it doesn't really have to look like a submarine.
What's important, he says, is what's happening on the inside.
This is modeled after it's a quarter scale of a real submarine, but internally the structure is like what a full-scale submarine would be.
Once a week, a sub is sent into the testing portion of the lake, which is about the size of a football stadium. There, the water reaches depths of 1,150 feet and has a constant temperature of 39 degrees.
So what you have is a nice, big, deep, cold bathtub of non-moving water. But really, the one thing that really makes it ideal is it's just so quiet. There isn't anything in the lake that's making noise. In fact, anybody out here with even a small upward motor makes more noise than our tests do.
The multi-million-dollar models are equipped with hydrophones, the underwater equivalent of a microphone. Once submerged, computers turn on the submarine's motors and pumps and then feed data back to the engineers and scientists on land. They analyze the information and determine how much noise is being generated. Commander Grundy says decades of research are paying off.
You know, the shape and structures that are out there today are the quietest they possibly can be.
And all of that technology that they used or discovered and researched up there is what they're using on today's submarines. It's pretty impressive. And that was former KTVB reporter Allison Newton. Those stories were from when KTVB would do a live tour of Idaho. Usually would happen in the springtime, and we would travel around the state finding cool stories. So speaking of traveling, Andrew Bartline and photojournalist Kevin Esslinger, the other members of the 208 team, well, they're doing just that. This morning, they got up way too early to catch a plane to Connecticut to cover this weekend's christening ceremony. Here's a sample of how that's going. It started with a very early stroll through security.
Kevin's getting arrested by the TSA at 3 a.m.
He's not. Hold on. I assure you, Kevin doesn't even know that woman.
That's his accomplice right there, that woman to the right. Trying to sneak toothpaste on the airplane. Not under his watch. I don't know what I did. Not under his watch.
Nobody has more fun with TSA before 5 a.m. than Andrew. From there, bound together like father and son, Kevin and Andrew were Connecticut bound. Their first impression from a portside plane window. Their second from the terminal crosswalk.
The sweet smell of Winnipeg.
That's actually Hartford, and that's a line from The Office.
It's riveting.
Almost as riveting as that New England winter foliage. But then...
It's a Connecticut accent. Hartford. Hartford.
Kevin and Andrew arrive at America's filing cabinet.
I don't know, they're in the same place. Show me the skyline. Hello.
Hartford's also known as the insurance capital of the world, by the way. But this weekend, the focus of the U.S. Navy will be on the shores of the Thames River in Connecticut for the third step of what it takes for the USS Idaho to once again become part of the naval fleet. Andrew and Kevin, they're going to be covering that for us beginning tomorrow.
think that lots of us have probably been waiting for weather, just like we're about to see over the next 5 days or so. We're going to see light winds, some sunshine, and lots of warming temperatures. So you can see beautiful views like this from Sun Valley with the blue sky is what we will continue to see. Now, the downside with the warming trend is that we will get some melting of the snow in the mountains. So probably not the best weekend for skiing, but great for some of those outdoor activities nonetheless. So in valley locations, we will see some light winds in the afternoon hours over the next 5 days or so. And then we'll also see that warming trend by the time we get to the end of the warming trend and it reaches its peak. Those temperatures will be about 10 to 15 degrees above average for this time of year. However, we are looking at some cooler and wetter changes coming on Wednesday and Thursday. So we really have to soak in these conditions while we have them. And I mentioned the winds, and we will see some of those lighter winds continue tomorrow, mainly in those afternoon hours. Really typical spring-like feel for as far as the winds go. Typically, we get an afternoon breeze almost every single day in the springtime, and pretty much from March until June. But you can see as we go into the evening tonight, things staying a little bit more on the mild side. Still a chilly morning tomorrow for a lot of places, but we are warming up to expecting to exceed the mid-50s tomorrow in the city of trees. But you can see that high pressure ridge off the coast is what is leading to some of these dry and clear conditions. So that will continue to remain over the region as we go into Sunday and even towards Tuesday. But you can see those high temperatures today still on the comfortable side, and we will continue to see those temperatures increase as we go into the next few days as well. So for the mountains, we'll see that warming trend increase and reach close to 60 degrees in mountain areas, and then those changes come Wednesday and Thursday. And for Boise, you can see that we get close to 70 degrees by midweek next week.
Well, today, March 14th, it is Pi Day, but it's also Idaho Women's Day. We understand it's a week after International Women's Day, but that's because on this day, 133 years ago, the Gem State adopted the Great Seal of the state of Idaho, created by Emma Edwards Green, the only state seal designed by a woman in the entire country. So Senate Concurrent Resolution 118 stated March 14th as Idaho Women's Day to acknowledge the influence, impact, and importance of women in Idaho's past, present, and future. Emma's original painting of the seal is stored at the Idaho State Museum and is too delicate to display in public. So you got to get a special viewing of that one.
The Korrika is an event that takes place every 2 years in the Basque Country. It's a fun run in support of the Basque language. So in the Basque Country, people run all throughout the country from one village to another for 11 days straight, 24 hours a day. There's one baton, and it is passed along through all of the different towns, different groups. And at the end of the Korrika, the message is read out loud, and it usually has something to do with, promoting Euskera, living in Euskera, just giving it all the recognition that it needs, even if it's just for those 11 days. We have to continue on for the rest of the 2 years, continuing that flame so that, the next Korrika can take place.
Euskera is an English word for Basque, by the way. The Basque language, huge part of being Basque and the entire identity, which is why they have the Korrika Run to promote and raise money for the Basque language, to keep promoting it, to make sure it stays alive. The Korrika is on right now. You can see there 5,100 miles to the east of us right now. It's a live look. This is their YouTube page, and they are having fun in the middle of the night. Runners, as you heard, are going to travel more than 1,500 miles over 11 days. It's the 23rd edition of this race, first one taking place back in 1980. It still holds the title of the longest relay race in the entire world. And boy, nobody stays home for this one, do they? That's amazing. And for those of you new to Idaho, Boise has the highest concentration of Basque people outside of the Basque Country, which is why we have an entire block dedicated to Basque culture. So when Korrika happens in the Basque Country, it also happens here in Boise. Boise's version, if you're interested, is on April 13th. You can see find that on the website, but don't worry, it's not an entire run of 1,500 miles. It's only a 5K. And guess what? You get fed afterwards. All right, a lot of comments today on House Bill 668 getting a public hearing in the Senate State Affairs Committee and getting passed through despite everybody testifying against it. If our legislative committees disregard public input on bills, why do they waste our time and money having these public hearings? Asked Steve. Any tax savings with the transgender medication bill will be spent on the lawsuits it will likely spawn, says Rob in Boise. This one, why are the state legislators going to stop with their far-right personal agendas and start dealing with the people of Idaho's agenda, especially when every citizen speaker is against the bill? Sage from Boise. The Public Policy Center released by BSU, these kind of things weren't at anywhere near the top of the list, by the way. Chuck in Jerome says the saying out there, they're saying there ought to be a law the legislature has taken to heart when it comes to creating social issues. If they put that energy into budgets, they could be done in February. That would be cost saving, says Chuck. One more here. All right. What percentage of the population identifies as transgender? What percentage of the legislative session has been devoted to trans bills and debates, says Ken? Well, I do know nationally, 1.6 million, which is 0.06% of the entire population. I only imagine it's much smaller here in Idaho. So, yeah, a lot of time and energy spent on that small population. So the legislators want to save taxpayers money, but continue to pass laws they know will have to defend in courts, along with that same line before. And this one from Karen in Boise. I served as a page during the 41st legislature when real laws were debated and passed. It was a great experience. I pity the current page's experience because having to listen to the crazy bills, the focus of today. For some perspective, this is the 67th legislative session. We'll see you tomorrow.